In 2011, Murmansk was shaken by the story of the cannibal Ivan Lebedev, who was discovered having tea with a half-eaten body. For the atrocities that distinguished this cannibal, he ended up in Russia's criminal encyclopedia. Right now, you and I will dissect the details of this long-ago sensational story, which horrifies to this day. How Ivan Lebedev became a brutal cannibal at just 21 years old. However, this is not the only story you and I will discuss. We will also examine the story of a family of cannibals from Kazakhstan who devoured their own relatives. And we will learn about a woman from Irkutsk who fed her 7-year-old son human flesh for a week. And believe me, each of these stories will make you shudder in horror. So watch each one to the end and write which one scared you the most. Let's go in order. Right now on YouTube, times are not the easiest, so I would be grateful if you don't forget to like and write any comment. This will help the video and the channel get back into recommendations, and it's also very important that you watch the videos to the end. We start with the story that shook all of Murmansk. The confession of a cannibal. He had everything a person needs for happiness. Love, friends, wealthy parents, his own apartment. But he dreamed of something completely different, to taste human flesh. Ivan Lebedev was born in 1990 and grew up in the family of a prosperous entrepreneur by Murmansk standards. Teachers loved the smart and neat young man. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, was on good terms with neighbors. Good guy, didn't drink, didn't smoke. But what can I say? Parents are just beautiful. Vanka from our entrance seemed to harm no one and was always calm. Yes, he flooded only once and even ran to help clean up the water. In school, he attended a boxing section. Nevertheless, friends noticed that he was very withdrawn. At a young age, Ivan became fascinated with mysticism, interested in non-traditional religious cults, and listened to corresponding music, but at the same time, he was quite a smart young man. After finishing school, his parents bought him an apartment in the neighboring entrance. However, the young man had serious psychological problems. In his teenage years, he tried to harm himself, cutting off the tip of his nose and even intending to perform a castration operation because he considered himself unattractive. I went to the garage and started sawing off the specific nose and wanted to do castration, but I could only saw off the nose a little bit. Here. But my parents found me, well, somehow they found out that I was in the garage. In this situation, the parents should have shown concern, but they did not pay due attention to the alarming signs. Once, the parents took Ivan to a psychotherapist. His strange thoughts subsided, and everyone decided that everything had passed. After finishing 11th grade at school number 20 in Murmansk, the young man dreamed of working as a chef and earning more than his father. Music after studying, Ivan went into the army, and when he was demobilized, he almost immediately got a job as a chef. The young man really liked cooking, but as it turned out, he wanted to try something unusual. Although in many sources it is indicated that Ivan was a waiter, he also sometimes worked part-time as a chef. Friends and acquaintances noted that Lebedev took antidepressants, and a few months before the tragedy, he lost about 10 kilograms. On August 18, 2011, 21-year-old Ivan started a correspondence on a dating site with history teacher Roman Ermakov, and he invited him to his place for a party. The 32-year-old new acquaintance was delighted and showed up, suspecting nothing. As Lebedev himself claims, he created the page for dating girls, but Ermakov allegedly wrote to him first. Later, investigators would refute these words. Ivan registered on the site exclusively to search for men. Ermakov was of non-traditional orientation, so Lebedev stated that he was too. The newfound friends were having a pleasant time. The maniac suggested undressing and going to the bathroom. There, clamping the victim's mouth with his hand, he inflicted 2 knife strikes to the neck, waited until the victim stopped twitching, and got down to business. First, he beheaded the victim, and then cut off several pieces from the body and, frying them in tomato paste, ate them with pleasure. Lebedev mocked the victim's body for several days, frying cutlets from his acquaintance, making sausage. In addition to everything else, Ivan even filmed his culinary experiments on video and posted them on social networks. Lebedev worked as a waiter and moonlighted as a chef, so he treated the victim in accordance with his gastronomic knowledge. He prepared a beefsteak with added oil and tomato paste. The wild meal lasted a week. Later, during interrogation, Lebedev would say that he was very worried and afraid. Stood with a knife behind this person. I was just trembling. I was afraid. When I did it, everything changed. Then I wasn't scared. I felt some kind of power. The first alarm was raised by Roman's mother. She called the police and reported that her son had not been answering calls for several days after a suspicious acquaintance on some site. He didn't want to go anywhere. Work at home. Work at home. Where did they come from? In the end, after a week, law enforcement officers figured out the address of the guy Roman went to. Arriving at the scene, Ivan opened the door to the apartment. What the law enforcers saw literally shocked them. In the kitchen sat Lebedev himself, and next to him was the almost completely eaten body of the 32-year-old history teacher. During the search of the monster's apartment, they found his personal diary, which he kept daily. In it, Lebedev wrote, "The fact that I cut this guy's throat didn't affect me at all. My conscience is clear. I don't wake up at night. I sleep soundly. Sometimes I even forget what I did. By eating human meat, you steal his strength and soul. All this is nonsense. What should I do with the skull now? Maybe an ashtray. Maybe he had children, but I don't care. If they ask where our dad is, I'll answer, he's in my hands." In November 2010, Ivan wrote to his former classmate that even after graduation, he dreamed of revenge on everyone who developed an inferiority complex in him. Also, on his page in the social network VKontakte, autobiographical notes were found under the title Confession to the Demon Inside Me. Also on his page, he repeatedly wrote that he really liked the movie The Silence of the Lambs about the killer cannibal Hannibal Lecter, and also indicated that he provides escort services for men. In the same social network, he wrote that human flesh should be consumed only fresh. He mentioned that already on the second day, the meat becomes tough and has a strange aftertaste. Not at all like in the first day of preparation. By the time of detention, only feet, bones, and elbows remained from the victim. Ivan consumed everything else as food. The only thing that upset the cannibal was that he didn't have time to cook all the dishes he planned. Lebedev's page on the social network VKontakte was reviewed by Moscow specialists in criminal psychology. One of them stated that the cannibal's confession is addressed to a girl, although there is no specific addressee in the text. The criminal himself said that he had a girl. When they started dating her, she said, "I like you because you're not like others," Ivan recounted. The couple managed to live together for a couple of months, and then the girl admitted that she wanted to break up because he was too strange. However, Ivan preferred solitude more, and according to him, he wasn't upset at all. As it turned out, the young cannibal had far-reaching plans. He wanted to meet people online, take their lives, and cook various dishes from their bodies. At the same time, he said that he even planned to open his own restaurant with signature dishes. During the investigation, Ivan himself claimed that he already had at least 10 people on his account, and he threw the remains into the nearest river. Most of the equipment for cooking meat the young man took from his parents, including the meat grinder. Investigators Ivan told that as soon as he got a job as a chef at the age of 20, he wanted to realize his childhood dream, to taste human flesh. However, the detectives could not find confirmation that there were other victims besides Roman. Law enforcers the young man coldly told how he invited Roman to his place and how he brutally took his life by stabbing him in the throat. "Ivanch, please explain where we need to go? We need to go to my home. What happened there? A crime happened there. I killed a person." The man whom the Murmansk cannibal ate could not be identified even by his own mother because literally nothing was left of him. His identity was officially established only after a genetic examination. "I invited him to my home, we sat a little and went to the bath. He undressed, and I stuck a knife in his throat. From the skull, I removed the scalp, pulled out almost all the teeth. The skull, feet, and palms I put everything in a yellow basin and placed it on the balcony. Then from the right thigh, I cut off a piece of meat about this size. Then I removed the skin, fat. And while everything was boiling, it boiled for 2 hours, I came, sat at the computer, listened to music and looked at recipes for how to make sausage mince. And I cut everything into pieces lengthwise and put it to fry. Added tomato paste, oil, fried and ate everything." According to relatives, Ivan was never seen with a girl. The father suspected that his son was interested in men, but that he ate people no one could have imagined. After what happened, Ivan's parents disowned their child. I grieve very much for the deceased. I grieve very much for our family. As of today, I have no son. I buried him. I don't pronounce the word son at all. This is a freak. According to the state defender, during the investigation, no one visited the guy. Under investigation, Ivan gave an interview to a newspaper. In it, he said that he does not regret what he did and is glad that he will be isolated from society, as he loves solitude. Before the court, it was decided to examine the maniac. The medical examination recognized him as insane. On March 1, 2012, Lebedev's case was transferred to the Pervomaysky Court of Murmansk, which sentenced the cannibal to indefinite treatment in a psychiatric hospital. He is still there to this day. Experts concluded that Ivan was unable to control his actions and realize their nature. In other words, at the time of committing the crime, he did not understand either the criminal nature or the consequences. And therefore, in accordance with the legislation, he cannot bear criminal responsibility. A program, Let Them Talk, was filmed about Ivan Lebedev, Confession of a Cannibal. Well, now you and I move on to another story. Every year in Russia, about 1,000 women are found guilty of committing murders. In the overwhelming majority, these are banal domestic conflicts. But it happens that women commit such crimes that make your hair stand on end. And the next two stories are just some of those. You and I are transported to Kazakhstan. The story I will tell you next is out of the ordinary even by the standards of cannibal maniacs. The Uzbev family, which consisted only of women, fed on their relatives. This plot is more suitable for the description of a fictional horror movie, but such a story really existed in post-Soviet Kazakhstan. It should be noted that there is practically no information, let alone materials, on this case. Everything was classified, but I managed to find a little information for you. In my opinion, it will be interesting for you to learn about this case. Then, in the habitual noisy Almaty, a wave of frightening rumors swept through, each one scarier than the last. But it became even more creepy when people learned that this was happening in reality. From mouth to mouth, especially, of course, by children and teenagers, the news was passed that in one of the apartments in the southern capital, 4 cannibals were arrested at once, and all of them were women. The rumors did not lie. This really happened with the Uzbev family, which initially consisted of 8 people. In 1999 in Kazakhstan, in Almaty, in an old shabby house in a 2-room apartment where there had been no repairs for several decades, 8 women huddled. The 2-room apartment was a fortress and a cage for them. The head of this unusual family was an elderly woman, Gulnara Uzba. Together with her lived her 4 adult daughters. At first, the mother lived in the apartment with 3 daughters, having married Zajipa Uzbaeva. But she, after a few years, divorced her husband and returned to her mother, and not alone, but with 3 daughters. Zajipa was the mother of 3 daughters. The eldest Dinara, the middle restless Amina, and the youngest capricious and spoiled Lisan. So it turned out that 8 women were locked in a cramped space, forced to share every centimeter in the small apartment and literally every crumb of bread. The family's life was far from idyllic. Arguments, quarrels, and mutual accusations were commonplace. The mother and sisters grumbled at Zajipa, who came herself and dragged her daughters. They blamed her for their troubles, for the cramped conditions and poverty. Every morning started with reproaches and ended with a stormy quarrel. Sometimes it even came to fights. Zajipa Uzbaeva came into the sight of law enforcement after a signal from a local doctor. Then the woman reported to the police that she smelled a distinct smell of decay in the Uzbev's apartment, which, in her feeling, resembled a cadaverous smell. Law enforcers decided to question the neighbors. It turned out that the large Uzbev family lives very secluded, even in summer not opening the curtains on the windows, never communicates with anyone. And in general, they are strange women. The neighbors were annoyed by the constant and creepy smell that came from the Uzbev's apartment. But everyone was sure that it was from the garbage they carried from the dump. No one raised the alarm, did not contact the police. Everyone didn't care. Each family lived its own life and did not want to interfere in others' affairs. and the smell from the apartment over time became even stronger, even more nauseating and frightening, and only occasionally through the tightly drawn curtains shone a dim light, indicating that people still live in the apartment. But the detectives were interested in another interesting detail. The older daughters and their mother had not been seen for 6 months already. Before that, they at least occasionally went to the store. Then law enforcers decided to enter the apartment. Zajipa tried to resist, but the police, ignoring her protests, entered. They immediately felt a terrible smell of decomposition. The apartment was dirty and unkempt. Garbage bags were scattered everywhere, and in the corner stood a pile of unwashed dishes. After a full inspection of the apartment in an old creaky closet, the police discovered a horrific find. There, like firewood, were stacked 4 mummified female bodies, from which all organs were completely absent. As it turned out, these were the 3 older sisters of Zajipa Uzbaieva and her own mother, whom she, along with her 3 daughters, devoured. During interrogation, Uzbaieva said that the constant quarrels and screams tired her, and in one of such scandals it came to assault. The sisters promised to throw her and her daughters out of the apartment or take their lives so they wouldn't interfere. Then the woman desperately began to fight back and at some point grabbed the first thing that came to hand. Turned out to be a knife. In a frenzy, she stabbed 2 sisters with the knife. Then the 3rd sister entered the conflict, whom Zajipa also killed. They decided to finish off Gulnara last so she wouldn't report to the police. They decided to eat the organs of their relatives not immediately. A couple of days later, all the food in the house ran out, and there was no money left at all. The family lived poorly anyway, and Zajipa had to feed her 3 daughters somehow. Then she decided to cut out the liver and cook it. At first, they ate the organs of the woman's sisters, and then they started devouring the organs of the elderly Gulnara. During the investigation, Zajipa felt no guilt. She stated that she was only defending herself, and to avoid starving to death, she decided to devour her relatives. The family lived like this for almost 6 months. There are no exact data on where the remains of the deceased were stored, but without a refrigerator, they would simply spoil. Most likely, some cut-out parts were placed in the freezer. The 3 underage girls were placed in a hospital and later transferred to guardianship authorities. Zajipa herself was examined by doctors, and she was recognized as insane. The most interesting thing is that the woman was placed in a specialized psychiatric clinic fenced with barbed wire in the village of Aktas in the Almaty region, the very same where 8 years earlier Nikolai Zumagaliyev was placed, who killed and ate about 10 women. At the moment, Zajipa is still in this clinic, and the fate of her daughters is unknown. Most likely, after what happened, they also had to undergo a long course of treatment. And now, finally, you and I move on to the 3rd, no less creepy story. All foreign media in 2009 wrote about the inhuman cruelty from the Irkutsk region, where a young mother hacked her friend to death and then arranged a cannibal feast in the presence of her 7-year-old son. The case, of course, is incredible, but for some reason, few people talked about it here. The outskirts of Irkutsk, the Kuibyshev microdistrict. The house on Osvozhdeniya Street 55. Local residents try to avoid it. In 2009, a terrible crime was committed in it. The hostess of the house hacked her friend with an axe, and then cooked food from her for a week. But what is most unimaginable and terrible is that for some music time, this friend was still alive. The cruel reprisal was discovered completely by accident. Homeless people found a strange heavy bag at the dump. Hoping to find clothes or food, they decided to open it. How surprised they were when they found 2 female legs in the bag. Here I can't show photos of the found fragments, so for those interested, I'll post them in the Telegram channel. The link is in the description under the video and in the pinned comment. As the operatives who arrived at the scene established, next to the trash can lay a nylon bag containing 2 female legs. It was possible to determine this thanks to the nails painted red. The investigators needed to find the remaining body parts, so they began to work out versions of what happened. The district officers were tasked with going around all the residents and identifying the more suspicious ones. After a couple of weeks of operational work, one of the law enforcers noticed the strange behavior of the residents of House 55 on Osvozhdeniya Street. Approaching the site, the policeman knocked on the door. The hostess of the house opened it, and behind her stood another woman, her friend. What seemed strange was that the women were digging in the greenhouse, although it was early March. The ground was still frozen. Approaching the house, he noticed a black spot resembling dried blood and several dirty basins. To all questions, the hostess answered, stammering. The district officer decided to fully inspect the territory. He discovered that next to the toilet, a fresh pit had been dug, in which they had not had time to bury a blue women's handbag. Already later, it was in this handbag that investigators discovered some human remains. This was a creepy tour of the house of 27-year-old Olesya Mostovshikova. The law enforcers finished in the kitchen, where on the table were found the remains of dinner prepared from human meat. Olesya did not deny and immediately confessed to everything. The young mother was taken for interrogation, where she told how and why she took the life of her acquaintance. Olesya Mostovshikova's childhood was difficult, according to her. Her mother died early. She was raised only by her stepfather. She never saw her biological father. He left before she was born. At 16, her stepfather died. After that, the girl was left completely alone. For some reason, no authority cared about her. By 18, the girl got married, but the family happiness did not last long. At 20, Mostovshikova found her husband hanged in the barn. After this shock, she began to drink heavily, although at that moment she was already 7 months pregnant. Olesya said that on March 5, 2009, she was drinking alcohol with 2 of her friends. All 3 did not work, and the money she received for child support she spent on alcohol. Late in the evening of that day, Olesya quarreled with her drinking companion Tatiana Romanchik. At some point, the acquaintances began to argue, and Tatiana called Olesya a bad mother, after which she grabbed an axe and struck Romanchik in the back. From the fallen and still victim, Olesya began to cut off parts, and later consume them as food. Some fragments the criminal burned in the stove. By morning, the exhausted victim died. Olesya first carried her body to the barn, after which she got hungry and by evening brought it back to the house. But the most terrible revelations of that reprisal the woman told the investigators later. Then Olesya could not explain why she ate Tatiana, blaming everything on the third drinking companion Yulia Tseigler. Supposedly, it was she who suggested cutting off a couple of pieces for a snack. During the interrogation, Mostovshikova was calm music, and without hesitation told everything in detail. The criminal said that for a week they cut off parts from the body every day, which they placed in the basement. I will also post the video of this interrogation in Telegram due to the details. I can't publish it in full here, but after a couple of weeks, a new, perhaps the most terrible statement appeared in the investigation. Olesya not only killed and ate Tatiana for a week, but also fed her meat to her 7-year-old child, as she also had no money for his food. The boy Ilya saw how his mother took the life and then devoured her acquaintance. It's terrifying to imagine what horror the child experienced. The woman who committed such a terrible crime was taken for a psychiatric examination, which recognized her as fully sane, although such actions raised doubts. After a couple more months, the trial began. The sentence for the incredibly cruel crime surprised everyone. Olesya Mostovshikova was sentenced to only 8 years of imprisonment. Unfortunately, it was impossible to apply stricter measures to her, as there are no articles for cannibalism in our country. There is also no article for feeding a child human flesh. Olesya was also ordered to pay Tatiana Romanchik's family 300,000 rubles as compensation. Yulia, who also fed on the victim's meat for a week, was only a witness in the case, although she was in the house at the time of the reprisal and knew about the crime. The question remains why she was recognized only as an accomplice. Olesya's son, 7-year-old Ilya, was sent to an orphanage. The further fate of the child is unknown to the media. This was done, most likely, so that the boy would not be bullied and pursued. A year later, journalists visited Correctional Colony number 11, where Olesya was. As the convict herself said, the first time was a test for her, as in such places they do not like cannibals. For those interested, where Mostovshikova will get the money to pay 300,000, well, the woman herself asked to work in the colony at the factory, where she sewed pillows and blankets. From the colony, Olesya writes letters to her uncle and aunt, but there is silence in response. Relatives do not want to communicate with the cannibal. In 2017, Olesya was released from the colony. The woman immediately changed her place of residence and got a job. There is no more information about her in the media. This is a very creepy story that you might never have heard of, as there is very little information on the case, although major foreign media covered this incident. A female cannibal in my memory. This is the second such story on my channel. The first was about a grandmother who dismembered 3 of her friends in her apartment in Khabarovsk, but there they could not officially accuse her of cannibalism. But now you and I move on to an equally terrible topic. Now,